This is your urgent call to action. We are all called to lead in a world in chaos, crisis, and turmoil. Join a pivotal global movement for change to transform the leadership crisis worldwide. Will you play it safe, or will you wake up, step up, and speak out? Like Nelson Mandela did for South Africa and the world, we need a radical new way to think, act, and lead, leading boldly into the future. Join host Anne Pratt, a Harvard Fellow and multi-awarded businesswoman, and unlock the best version of yourself to revolutionize leadership with what the world needs now.
Greetings to all you future bold leaders. Thank you for joining us from around the world. My name is Anne Pratt, formerly from South Africa, and relocated abroad to attend a Harvard Leadership Fellowship in Boston, Massachusetts, in the United States of America. Our bold leader today, or should I say late at night, joins us from the southern tip of Africa. He is a respected academic and engineer who I had the pleasure of meeting around 2009, when at the time I tried to persuade him to move out of his very successful academic career and move into public office. I am delighted to say I did not succeed. He is the former vice president of the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers worldwide, representing some 400,000 members in 160 countries in an institution that is about 130 years old. He is an academic who spent 10 years with the University of Pretoria, and since 2013, he has been with the University of Johannesburg, initially as Executive Dean of Engineering and the Built Environment, but since December 2017, he is the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Research and Internationalization, helping the University of Johannesburg establish its global credentials as an institution of global excellence and stature. Stay with us. You won't want to miss his inspiring stories and conversation around why and how it benefits the world to have a common set of global goals in this time of globalization, the Sustainable Development Goals. His Mandela moment and how meeting a criminal assailant in his home inspired him to understand that there is good and bad in everyone, and the good that came out of that very adverse and difficult situation. We also learn about how he has transformed the University of Johannesburg and is changing the models of academia, how we co-create transdisciplinary degrees in arts and economics and technology, and how we need to blend the role of the classroom and the corridors of academic institutions by putting young leaders on a bus across the African continent and blending the academic portion of what we learn with the University of Life. We warmly welcome Professor Saurabh Sinha and welcome to Leading Boldly into the Future. So Saurabh, thank you so much for creating this time to reconnect. It's been a while, but it's wonderful to have you as part of this conversation and talking about the future of leadership and perhaps even the future reimagined. So thank you so much.
And thanks very much. And thank you for your time and for inviting me on board this conversation.
Great. You're a wonderful academic. You've had a very successful career in academia in South Africa. I know you spent 10 years at the University of Pretoria before you became Executive Dean at the University of Johannesburg. But then you rose to Deputy Vice Chancellor for Research and Internationalization. Perhaps you could begin by just sharing the vision of the University of Johannesburg, but also the mandate in terms of using academic institutions as a force for change and good, not only in the country, but in the world.
Yeah, that's a great question. And so the vision of the University of Johannesburg is to be an international university of choice, anchored in Africa, dynamically shaping the future. Now, Anne, we've always had this vision. And if you look at visions of universities around the world, you'll probably find a similar aspiration and universities are able to draw inspiration from these kind of things. Now, the University of Johannesburg, we are also located in Johannesburg as a major city on the African continent. We had to say to ourselves that, well, there will be other universities with similar vision. So what is it that we will do to distinguish our place? What would be that claim to fame for us? In this process, as you mentioned, I joined the University of Johannesburg in 2013. In 2017, I became Deputy Vice Chancellor for the Research and Internationalization portfolio. And just around then, the new Vice Chancellor came in. Professor Marwala joined in January 2018.
Yeah.
And we found ourselves saying that we were at the end of the first 5 years of our new strategy. And we said, what happens 5 years and beyond? And so there, Prof. Marwala's background is in computational intelligence. I happen to come from an engineering background. And we then said, well, the fourth industrial revolution was something that he had done a pitch on, and it was something very exciting for the university. But at a university as large as we are with multiple disciplines, we immediately said, that to what end do we want to contextualize within the fourth industrial revolution? And we said that we want to be transformative, we want to be transformational. And it was in that context then said, how do we actually bring a thematic angle of the fourth industrial revolution to ultimately make impact for society? So that is really what we are trying to do, from our vision, but also in terms of impact. And of course, in the case of my own portfolio, through research and internationalization.
And, it kind of stimulates another question in a way, Saurabh. I mean, why is the internationalization aspect of this so important? And I've seen quite a lot of the work you've done in internationalizing the University of Johannesburg, which has been very commendable. Why is the globalization issue so important, and how do you think it can better the world?
So I think immediately when you think about, the fourth industrial revolution and technological innovation, what's happening is that the borders, in a way, are virtualizing. Here we are connected across continents, and this, during the COVID-19 period, we've really seen this to kind of accelerate. And so when it comes to research, innovation, internationalization, it makes sense. Sometimes we think about it in terms of global engagement, because the problems that we are trying to solve today can be best solved if we are able to use the optimal strengths that exist across different nations. And I like to say and think maybe in global, I like a little pun on it, which is local, which is take the strengths locally, globalize it, learn from what is taking place in other parts of the world, and intertwine that with the research strengths that we have locally. So that brings to home the point of strategic international partners partnering. And that is something that we do quite extensively at the University of Johannesburg. You see that in the image at the back, you see the multiple dots, and that's where this connects.
That's wonderful, Saurabh. And, if we talk about leadership, I mean, as you've already alluded to, we have virtual borders, we have big global issues. What are the kind of perhaps 3 big strategic leadership challenges that keep you concerned at night and are calling out for us to reimagine the future?
So I think that, the world embraced the Sustainable Development Goals through the United Nations. It immediately meant that we have much less time, and now we were further compounded by the aspect of COVID-19. So that would be the first, is this area of the Sustainable Development Goals. How can we attain that? Because it's easy to say, and COVID kind of creates also an excuse that maybe we need to extend the deadline. But are there ways to be able to still do certain things in terms of maybe we may not reach it, but keeping that timeline, at least for now, and then thinking in terms of how do we get there. That's the first one.
Yeah.
The second one is in the area of what we call in South Africa the triple challenges of poverty, inequality, and unemployment. Now, these three triple challenges do actually connect, because if we are able to attain the Sustainable Development Goals, then we would have also solved these three problems. I say that try and bring about some emphasis in terms of our local scenario in South Africa, especially when it comes. The third area is that I work in a higher education setting. So the question is, what do we do from an education point of view to build and bridge the gaps that I have mentioned, especially around the triple challenges? So those are three things that keep me awake. And obviously, because when you are awake, then you have some thoughts and solutions, some solutions to it, not all, of course.
Of course. So within that context, Saurabh, if we think about the triple challenges you alluded to, I mean, those are big issues for South Africa, but also many, many nations around the world. You know, I was talking to a friend the other day, more than 100 million people go to bed hungry at night. These are bigger issues, you know, we see around the world. What is it, do you think it is that universities need to be perhaps researching and teaching differently to call us out to exercise leadership in perhaps a different way?
I think over time, what has happened across universities, not just in South Africa, but around the world, is that academics, including myself, we have our own very strong discipline backgrounds. You know, you quest for knowing more and more about your area of specialization, which I kind of call disciplinary depth.
Yeah.
Now, what is also important today, particularly when you are thinking about the Sustainable Development Goals and how interconnected they are. For example, if you try and deliver quality education, you are likely to find that gender equality is going to improve. So the interconnected nature of the problems that we see, the grand challenges that we see around the world, means that we have to think in terms of a transdisciplinary approach. And there are multiple of these multidisciplinary, cross-disciplinary, interdisciplinary, but I like to think of transdisciplinary as something slightly different. And what makes it different is where practitioners, people in government, people that make policies, they are brought in to augment the academic community in a university. And this group, in congruence, delivers the kind of education. They co-create the education. So there is the benefit to students where the real world kind of comes to the classroom. So I think that the transdisciplinary platform is something that can be a kind of a paradigm shift for universities. It is not saying that disciplinary depth must be cast aside. It is saying that can we build breadth of multiple disciplines in a transdisciplinary format, simultaneously, not one or the other, but it's both.
And is it just about policymakers and government, or is it people who represent other voices in society, whether it be, you know, captains of industry, civic society? You know, how far do you go?
Some years ago, around about 2009, I moved into a program. I was co-leading a program with Drexel University in Philadelphia. And this project, it still exists today, is called Engineering Projects in Community Service. And what this particular platform does is that it couples with non-governmental organizations, with the local government entities, especially if it's something that will impact the, you know, a municipality area. And what is that university students and staff will go out, engage with the community, with a non-governmental partner, and will look at solving a problem using multiple skills. But there was something special in how that initial engagement worked. Normally, you may find that there's an academic department or a single discipline or a researcher that goes out and engages the community. The difference in this particular initiative was that a transdisciplinary, people from multiple disciplines will go together in that initial engagement. The kind of lenses that you take are different. And then with those lenses, you will see the same community problem differently. That helped us in making and embedding some of these solutions with the community rather than to or for the community. And so when you think about sustainable development goals, it really this lens of multiple dimensions in solving problems.
Take us back to a moment in time and a very specific example in terms of what was the issue, what was the team, and how did you create that impact and solution? I mean, that would bring it to life for us.
So I'm going to give two examples. One is a very simple example, and this is actually when I was still involved in the teaching program, where I had students that were involved in certain innovation in terms of a design project. And I work in electronic engineering, so these students were coming from that discipline.
Was this?
No, it was in South Africa when I was still at the University of Pretoria.
Okay.
And so the students then got a little assignment, and I said, well, we've got to take care of a certain pond which is affected by a certain kind of fungus or amoeba and things like that. So the electronic engineering students then took kind of their toolkit, which involved sensors and computers to evaluate the water quality, to sample the water quality, and then induce a different kind of chemicals into the water to be able to deal with this problem of amoeba and fungus and whatever were the kind of pollutants in that sense.
Where was that, Saurabh?
This was still an example within the university context. So I'll come to another environment which is outside. And so we then brought in students from biology who didn't have the advantage of all of this technology that the electrical engineering students had. And so I said to them, how are you going to solve this problem? And they said, well, we just need to introduce a certain species of fish into this, which doesn't require any batteries, doesn't require any technology. And depending on how much the problem is, that the fish will be able to reproduce and would be able to take and tackle this problem, which is a sustainable solution and will cost us next to very, very cost-effective solution.
Yeah.
So you can see that sometimes you don't need a very complex approach in solving such a problem. A different example, which is in the locality of Little Akane, which is, there are two Little Akanes. There's one in South Africa as well, by the way. This one is in Central District in Botswana. We took a group of students there to examine, the kind of work that they could do, if there are problems and challenges that they see that the community is facing. And the students went out there and they said, well, it looks like people are still, cooking with, they smoke when they are lighting a fire for cooking. And they're often doing it in closed areas, especially when it gets cold because it's close to the Kalahari. And then they said, well, maybe we can give them a solar solution. It sounded very good. And so we got a solar solution out there and we delivered the tech, and then we got back to Pretoria. And then 4 or 5 months later, we said, well, let's go back and just do an evaluation of how things are going. We went there. We found that the villagers are no longer using the solutions that we had delivered. We thought it was very eloquent, by the way. And then when we engaged with the villagers, what's going on here? We gave you such a great solution. Yeah. And they said, well, you gave us, yes, it's true, you gave us a good solution, but this particular area is also a malaria area. And when the smoke was removed, it meant that the mosquitoes would come back. And so while we offered the community a solar solution, it meant that it was coupled with malaria mosquitoes, the Anopheles mosquitoes. And so we immediately had to say, oh my goodness, look at this. We thought we were solving a problem and we created another one. Now, when you take out there and you look at it from a transdisciplinary point of view, and if we had people from the social sciences and from the humanities, you would have found that they would have engaged with the community differently rather than just providing a solution. And in that, we would have not had the blind spot of this particular problem. So that's been the kind of the thinking. And so when I moved into the engineering faculty as executive dean or as dean, as is used in the US, I immediately realized that we have to connect our solutions in a transdisciplinary setting, coming from an engineering background, but it must still have the lens of the humanities and the social sciences. And Sustainable Development Goals provides a very nice segue into that.
So just to take that a little further, do you have any examples, Saurabh, of how you've restructured or redesigned your university environment, whether it be in terms of formal structures, or is this an informal process? And do you think it should be a formal process of redesigning how universities are currently structured, and what is the opportunity to do it differently?
Yeah, the university already, so the university's strategy changed in 2014 when we adopted a new strategic goal called Global Excellence in Stature.
Yeah.
And till 2018, that was almost a 5-year period, we were looking at that, realizing that strategy. That strategy meant that we were recruiting quite a bit internationally, students, staff, postdoctoral fellows, major part of the university. And there was an ingredient that was kind of emerging side by side, which was the very fast advancing technological revolution around the world. So when Professor Marwala came in, and this strategy was almost in its 5-year, we said, well, the strategy was designed till 2025, but we were interested in an academic stimulus package. Like you have economic stimulus, but something similar, that a set of catalytic initiatives. So we said the strategy for 2025 Global Excellence in Stature, which we call GES, is something that's okay. But if we have to bring in the dimension of the fourth industrial revolution, then what are the catalytic strategic initiatives that we need to put in place? The University of Johannesburg then invested, after it was a major contribution as a university, we had a set of teams that were created in deep consultation with Senate, with faculty boards, and then we came up with the catalytic initiative. But by the way, it was not only structured, but also unstructured conversations, so a combination that then led to the formulation of this academic stimulus package, which was then put in place for 5 years. And we also were able to resource it through the University's Council. For the audience in the US, that is the same as a university board. And the board or the council then allocated almost in rand terms, R500 million to realize this strategic contextualization for the fourth industrial revolution. And so that's actually how we went about doing it. And I should say that we were doing this at the University of Johannesburg, but something happened, which we had not quite, was that South Africa was also looking at how do you create, I gave the triple challenges of unemployment, inequality, and so on. And we then said, what is our role in trying to solve these triple challenges? And immediately we then said that we can only create so many jobs in the physical space.
Yeah.
But we add a virtual space on top of this. How many jobs can we then create in that space? That conversation then started, and it became a national movement because the Vice Chancellor of the university, which for the US audience is the president of the university, he then said, what do we actually do in terms of a country? And the president of South Africa, President Ramaphosa, then appointed the Presidential Commission on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. So in a way, the UJ story became a national agenda. It is today a regional agenda. We didn't expect all of that, but it has kind of worked out in that way, which has brought, sometimes you need kind of disruptions, but in a positive way in the environment, but also from outside the environment. And we have been able to find ourselves catalyzing, but also catalyzed by this movement I like to call it a movement, which is the fourth industrial revolution in our context. And right now we are looking at the next phase of that in terms of our strategy beyond 2025.
So in that, when you say regional, are you talking about African regional? When you talk about it becoming a regional, is it across parts of the African continent now? And if so, what area? And just briefly, what is the next stage?
It's interesting that, so regional on the one end is, of course, naturally, is our strategic partners on the continent. Also, I gave the vision, which says anchored in Africa. So it's also about with work within the continent. But we also see ourselves regional in a slightly different way, because South Africa is also an emerging economy within the BRICS cluster. That's 40% of the world's population. And so we do find symbiosis with some of our thinking with the BRICS areas. And so for example, one of the catalytic instruments under this academic stimulus package that I mentioned, joint research centers with universities within the BRICS. And that is something that we've also been able to realize with our partners. For example, at Nanjing Tech, we have a joint center on sustainable materials. And so we have a couple of these initiatives. So it's regional, but it's also regional geographically on the one end, on the continent, but also in terms of a metaphor within the emerging economies.
I'm with you. And just very briefly, what is the next step of the strategy, the next phase?
Question. No, I'm just joking. The area, and in terms of the next phase, is that we know that the fourth industrial revolution has done quite a lot for the university in terms of our positioning within the continent, within the global environment. But we've been really challenging ourselves and saying, how does the globe reach the Sustainable Development Goals? We've been challenging the African Union came up with something called Agenda 2063, which has a map with the Sustainable Development Goals contextualized from an African perspective. And we then said that our next part of our strategy in terms of making impact must be a way that we can attain the SDGs. And so if I have to kind of summarize the thinking, I think of it as SDG 4.0, which is where the leverage of digital transformation comes to the context of the Sustainable Development Goals as one way to be able to accelerate our journey, and in our case, from an education point of view, but our journey to the SDGs still for the timeline 2030, to be much more ambitious and bold in what we want to attain.
Moving slightly to a more personal side, what in your young life do you think was a life-defining moment for you? We all go through, everybody has a story. We have moments of transformation and change, and something that often stands out. In your young life, can you take us back in time to a moment that really was tough, difficult? What was it?
I finished my undergraduate degree, and I had an amazing opportunity. I traveled a bit, and then I came back to South Africa. And as soon as I came back, there was kind of a crime incident, by the way.
What year was that?
2001.
2001. So and where were you?
And the incident happened in Pretoria, by the way.
Pretoria.
And of course, that crime is one of our problems in South Africa. Now, I had to really reflect on, now what happened? Do I stay in South Africa? Do I look at opportunities?
Can you tell us what happened, how you felt at the time?
It was obviously, any crime experience is quite negative. And so I had this experience. I kind of came back in the house, and quite early in the morning, there was, this crime, the group that came into the house. But it could have been really worse. It could have been really bad. But during that time, where one individual, they were also kind of like what we call a gang, where people sometimes have to do certain things to get admission or recognition in that gang. And so the person had the opportunity, if they wanted, to do anything to me. They actually ended up not doing. They didn't injure me in any way. They took stuff. But what was kind of amazing in a way, at least from this negative experience, was that there was good in that person, including the persons who could have done a lot of damage to me. And I immediately said to myself that if in such a person there is good, how do I amplify that good in others and in myself? And so I moved away from the very amazing opportunities in industry. I had just work back obligation. I had a bursary or a scholarship in US terms with a company called Kentron. And I could go and work for Kentron, and all these doors were open. And I said to myself that, academia allows us to scale through education a form of impact. And so I said, okay, things can actually go bad quite quickly. So why not start working on one's kind of legacy, even already at that time? I didn't really know quite what it meant, but it brought about for me an association with others who were like-minded. And one such organization is called the IEEE, which is the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers, where I as a volunteer. Mm-hmm. And I found a number of initiatives that were looking at technology and technological solutions. And over time, the engineering projects and community service with Drexel University actually came about due to the connectedness that IEEE brings with the global community. I don't think it was necessarily by design at that stage. I was looking to change I was looking to change the world in a way, but I found that volunteering changed me as a person. And it also took back from me that negative experiences, even the most negative experience, there's quite a bit of positive that can come out of it. It is how we interpret those situations that make it negative or positive. And that really helps to redefine my own paradigm.
That's so interesting, Saurabh. My late mother would always say to me, with every adversity comes great opportunity. And it's the ability to find the gift in that moment. And you also made reference, Saurabh, to the fact that then that event triggered you into doing a lot more volunteer work and how that has supported you. So what is the gift of volunteering? How has that transformed your life and your leadership capability?
The one most important part has been that it brought about kind of a network, one in this case around the world, because of the organization that I particularly volunteered through. But I think second part was that I was developing as an academic into my research programs at the university, which was a very technically oriented work. And the volunteer then gave me an edge on professional development and leadership. Being able to interact with people around the world brought in the aspect of diversity and how and what diversity means when it comes to exercising and enabling excellence. And so all of these kind of things started to, they were coming in different pieces, it's not like I was going to look for diversity. I just found that if you want to now solve a problem in the Tlakane dealing with solar solution, you need a diversity of minds. You need a diversity of demographics. And so and then it started to come, and then it became kind of a pattern. Being an engineer, I was not trained like people in the social sciences that diversity is important. I didn't have a course that said, diversity 101, but it kind of came through the volunteering experience. And also some of our projects were within the African continent, going out into Kampala and appreciating.
In Uganda.
In Uganda, that's right. And then people don't have electricity. And then how do you actually solve that problem if someone wants to get market access and does not have electricity? How do you, through a cell phone and a solar solution, give and bring about that market access for that individual and enable a person's livelihood? So the moment you start to see these little experiences, and it becomes something that shapes you, and in a way closes the gap between one's mind and heart.
That's so interesting. And the volunteering work, Saurabh, was for the Institute of Electronic and Electrical Engineers Worldwide, which I think you mentioned is about 400,000 members in 160 countries, and it's been going for about 130 years. Is that the volunteer organization?
That's right.
And I mean, you became vice president of that as well, right?
Yeah, that was amazing. I became vice president in. I was contesting the election. It was kind of like a complex year because I was also changing jobs from the University of Pretoria to University of Johannesburg, and I was moving in a role of executive dean of a very large faculty with close to 10,000 students, staff across 4 campuses. And that was happening on the one end, which was in I call it my day job at the time. And the IEEE, I was running in an election. It was kind of complicated because I couldn't quite get out of the election because
the election for the Institute.
For the Institute, yeah. So I stuck to that. I told the University Vice Chancellor, who was Professor Iron Rensberg at the time, that this is a big opportunity, and I'm going to try my best to do both, and to do both in an exceptional way. And he said, well, is it even possible? Because it would mean quite a bit of travel around the world where IEEE is. And of course, it's headquartered in Piscataway in New Jersey, but has offices in other parts of the world.
In New Jersey and the USA, right?
That's right, yeah, in the US.
Yeah.
I always try to look for inspiration in others. So I said, well, Prof. Lee Jamieson, who is at Purdue University in the US, she was dean and IEEE president at one point. I think it was about 2007. And so I said to myself that if Prof. Jamieson could be president and dean at the same time, it should be okay to be vice president and dean.
Yeah.
And so I went and told the principal at the university, vice chancellor, that I think it should be fine because she did that, and I'm going to bring her in and get advice from her, which I did, and also from a number of other people around the world. And I think it made me a lot more innovative. It forced me to really ensure that I have an excellent team of people who were reporting to me in the university, but also around the world. And I think it made me appreciate that, you don't always have in life the right people, but if you kind of empower, then you can make in that people right, the kind of bring about alignment to big objectives. And that's what I did. And to be able to carry the burden of those 2 very big jobs simultaneously.
Well, it's listening to you sort of stimulates another thought in how you draw inspiration from others and turning to a wonderful human being who's been a global icon and not only first democratically elected president of South Africa, but a Nobel Peace Prize winner and a great icon of the world, our very own Nelson Mandela. I'm curious to hear how, in your remarkable career and life, is there a very particular moment that you can take us back to where Mandela, or Madiba as we affectionately call him, struck a chord, lit a fire, inspired you, motivated you?
Yeah, I mean, there are multiple moments, especially with a person like Nelson Mandela. But I think that the one aspect that I remember when he was retiring, and there was a pitch with...
and that was in 19... When you said retirement,
Yeah. It's good that you're asking that, because this aspect of retirement in Mandela's case was actually multiple times. He retired as president, and there was one place where I think he was around 2005, so it was after the presidency. He was saying, and then there was, I think Ahmed Kathrada was in the same venue, and he said, well, I'm retiring. And I think someone said, well, can we believe you? Because you've said this before, and then he did kind of slow down from his public life. And I think that when you see that happening and you are kind of like half his age, you start to realize that there's still a lot to do, and that one has to start working on those legacies. And one way to, and what did Mandela do in terms of amplifying his approach, and by having by inspiring others. And you might actually notice that I'm sometimes almost struggling at times to say, of course, Mandela is late, but to say the late Nelson Mandela, because I think for us it's very difficult to think about it like that, because his value systems are so instilled in all of us that through all of us, in one way or the other, I think his values continue to live. And I often ask myself in challenging this, now as a Deputy Vice Chancellor of a large university with 50,000 people and plus, I often have very difficult times every now and then. And then I say to myself, how would have Nelson Mandela looked and solved this particular problem? And I think that the moment you have that kind of thinking, you step back and you start to see solutions, and you start to see the good in those situations. And I think that in a way, it may have helped me even in that, looking at that crime situation. It was very negative, but I think that it was a kind of an end.
That was also a Mandela moment for you. But Saurabh, in fact, I seem to recall it. I think it was around his 80th birthday. And, when he said, I'm retiring from retirement, that famous line, don't call me, I'll call you, kind of thing. I was curious to hear, so in taking that Mandela moment and that point of inspiration around, here he was, around 80 years of age and now retiring from retirement, and in taking that moment back to your very big challenges that you have in your role as Deputy Vice Chancellor, is there a particular moment that comes to mind where you were facing a difficult situation at the university and you stepped back to think about what would Nelson Mandela do in this situation?
Yeah. South Africa in 2015 faced one of the largest student movements called Fees Must Fall. We have 4 campuses, and one of our campuses, Durenfontein, had quite a bit of challenges that came about. All our campuses were, of course, affected, maybe not to the same extent as all the universities in the country, but it brought about a couple of engagements. And in engineering, I was dean at the time, and in engineering, the aspect of decolonization of knowledge came about. And on the one, if you kind of think about it in a calm way, you can understand what it may mean in the context of engineering. But during a protest, there's not a lot of calmness finds itself displaced. And so I had to really engage with different student groups. I remember being in an office and I couldn't quite easily leave the area. And so I said, well, the opportunity here is actually to engage with students and ask them, what do you actually mean by decolonization? And we started to chat, and we started to question, and I said around the room to different students, what do you mean? Only to find that there was no harmony of what it means. And in this reflection, I said, well, maybe we need to co-create what it could mean if we have to make impact through engineering. And suddenly when we started to do that, we brought about the angle and the thinking in terms of how do you use engineering to enable social justice. Yeah, and I think that, if it wasn't kind of, the indirect kind of thinking that, we often quoted Mandela in our graduations, the long walk where you are and you feel, that you're going up the mountain and you have to look around and look at and appreciate that glorious vista. But then there are always, the next part, and that's what I said, that, there is, in fact, much more to be done here. And that's what the student movement is saying. And how do we actually, make, they say, don't ever let a crisis go to a waste.
Yeah.
And we said let's actually use that to cultivate our next journeys. And we did that. It's quite effectively. As a university, and the protests subsided. And what remained was for us multiple learnings, which were perhaps some areas of blind spot for us as a university. And so I think that, that those are some of the things. But I think that, even if you think about the long walk and the mountain and going up this, we always do that. Sometimes you're thinking you're going in front of on a peak of a mountain or a hill, and you have in front of you a mirror. And if you look in the mirror, you usually see yourself. But sometimes in looking at yourself, you miss the world behind you that the mirror also gives. It's different perspective.
Yeah.
And I think that the Fees Must Fall showed us that side that we were not seeing, because we were so much seeing and identifying with what we were doing must be on the right track. But we found that this not be one track.
Just kind of moving right out of that space into a few fun facts. What is your favorite? Do you have a favorite childhood memory?
Yeah, I think that, there was a time that we went into the Kalahari Desert because I was partly in Botswana at one stage. And I think, just the unexpected was this huge, set of elephants that, herd of elephants that go towards the Okavango. And it was really unexpected, this monument, period that happens in this period. So that was an interesting thing. And it also goes to some of the way that the teams work.
Were they up close? Did you feel endangered? Did you feel fearful or threatened in any way?
Well, there's always this kind of a threat feeling, but, we obviously were with others who were more familiar with the area and explained that, this happens. Initially, it's a little bit of a shock, and then you see this. And then it happens where this group then goes up towards Angola. And that, I think, is one of the largest movements of that kind in the world. So that was a coincidence, and it kind of came to mind from a childhood perspective.
You're the academic. You've published so much. You've co-authored many books and, of course, published, prolifically around the world. What is one of your favorite books?
Well, I must say that the work that I publish is more in the technology space, but maybe pausing a bit away from that. That one of the books, which is by Tom Friedman, is a book called "Thank You for Being Late." That means so just before you think of something else there, what happened here was that Tom the author was waiting for somebody to join for breakfast. And this was in New York, and New York is, of course, busy, people are rushing. And so the individual came late to the meeting. And in that moment of that individual coming late to the meeting, he had the ability to enjoy a moment of pause. And in today's very rushed way of how we live, the moment of pause is, in fact, something that has become somewhat missing. And so it was that moment of pause that led to that book. And so that's a book that I enjoy. But I also always remember that in all that we do, we also have to take stock and we have to pause from time to time. And so that was the tilt.
Oh, wonderful. And what is something you remember about your parents that really stood out as being a teachable moment?
Yeah, so my mother is actually an entomologist, and so yeah, that's a study of insects.
Yeah, the insects. Yeah,
and so insects were. By the way, I kind of like really, insects are a bit of. I get that squeamish feeling. But insects are incredibly intelligent in how they're able to, if you look at a locust and if you look at how it jumps. So I have quite a bit of a takeaway from that point of view from my mother. My dad is a civil engineer, so there are probably areas of common thinking. His background is in water resources. And so I've also had some takeaway from that, given my engineering background.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, two remarkable people, I have no doubt. So in our final moments together, Saurabh, any final takeaways about the future reimagined, the future of leadership, and any thoughts you think Mandela would share with the world today about navigating this reimagined future?
I asked myself the other day, I think it was when your first message came about, I think it was maybe September, and being in the COVID-19 period, and I said to myself, what would have happened? How would have Nelson Mandela, if he was president, how would he have handled the COVID-19 period? Because I think there were two things. Obviously, with any pandemic, there's a very strong kind of a top-down, even at national level, in how you deal with the pandemic, with lockdowns and so on. Yeah. But then there is another side, which is of empathy. You talk about physical distancing, but in that we sometimes forget about social solidarity, the aspect of Ubuntu. And I think that if we were looking at this situation of COVID, then I think that obviously Ubuntu is not only, it can even be done in some way in a social space, but in an online space, still keep away, but keep together. And I think that the element of empathy and the element of resilience would be much more pronounced if he were the president. And I think that for me, the elements of resilience and empathy, we are going into a world where there will be much greater uncertainty. And how do we actually make ourselves and others be adaptable for multiple and different kind of changes? I think that is what I think, uncertainty in a world that is ever changing and the university's vision dynamically shaping the future. How do we actually do that with empathy and build resilience?
Well, Saurabh, thank you so much. I think you're a remarkable, not only academic, but transformational leader who has definitely displayed your own transformational capabilities. Thank you so much for sharing your pearls of wisdom with us. I look forward to breaking bread with you when you come across to the USA, to Princeton University, and I so look forward to reconnecting in person. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I look at my sabbatical much more positively with that proposal of having the chance to meet with you and to spend some time in the Boston area. So looking forward to that. And thank you again, Anne, for engaging me and for this very nice time also for myself to reflect on the last couple of maybe two or three decades. Thank you.
Take care. I've had the good fortune of knowing Saurabh over many years. I've witnessed his rise to the higher echelons within higher ed in South Africa, but with an impact across the African continent and around the world. So many things stood out in this conversation today. Perhaps most significantly, globalization is a stark reality. We cannot put the clock back. We cannot put the genie back in the bottle. We're living in a radically different and changed world. A world where global threats, opportunities, and challenges transcend those national borders, and where popular nationalism and national thinking can no longer survive. This is an urgent call to action for higher ed institutions. Like the University of Johannesburg, they need to radically reform and transform the way higher ed is developed and presented and delivered to our future leaders. How? Interdisciplinary degrees, for example, combining economics, politics, and technology. How to take our students from simply inside the classroom to outside the classroom at the University of Life. Combining that intellectual, logical thinking with that practical, experiential learning. It reminds me of a Chinese proverb which goes like this: tell me and I'll forget. Show me and I'll remember. Involve me and I will understand. It also highlights the need to move beyond the Western textbooks, to rewrite some of those textbooks and include local thinking, local examples into global frameworks and global paradigms. I loved what he shared about Nelson Mandela and part of his legacy being clear, solid, and instilled values, and how in this go-go world where it's said that human beings have an attention span of less than a goldfish, we need to consciously make time to pause, to reflect, to rethink, to retrain our brains, which helped him in times of grave adversity when a criminal gang entered his home and when negotiating during volatile student protests on campus. My name is Anne Pratt. Thank you so much for joining us on Leading Boldly into the Future. So until next time, join our movement, sign up and share with your friends. Remember to take care and take thoughtful, bold action. One step for you, but together, one giant step for humanity.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leading Boldly into the Future. Please find links and connections mentioned in this show in our blog and never miss an episode by subscribing at anne-pratt.com. That's ANNE-PRATT.com. May these insights from inspiring industry leaders, remarkable disruptors, and courageous champions of change bring forth a brand new you, emboldened, empowered, and ready to inspire hope. Come back soon, share with your friends, sign up on anne-pratt.com and join our movement for change. Why? Because the world needs you to lead boldly too.